Let me go. I need to get to the car.
No, listen to me. You can't just run.
The rain came down like it had a grudge. Nadia felt it before she saw him, that cold, creeping sensation at the back of her neck she hadn't felt in 3 years. The kind her body had memorized before her mind ever could. Her heels stopped on the wet pavement. She didn't run. Not this time. The black car idling at the end of the street, headlights cutting through the downpour like two accusatory eyes. She recognized the silhouette behind the wheel before the door even swung open. The broad shoulders. The leather jacket. The slow, deliberate way he moved, like a man who had never once believed he could lose something he called his. Nadia. Marshal Robb said her name the way he always had, like a leash. 3 years. 3 years of silence, of building, of breathing, and he'd found her. Her fingers curled at her sides. But then she felt it. A different kind of warmth. A hand, steady, certain, possessive in an entirely different way, pressing flat against the small of her back. And a voice. Low. Quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't need to raise itself because the whole world already leaned in to listen. Is there a problem? Nadia watched Marshall's eyes travel past her, and for the first time in her life, she watched him go pale. Minute Sun stepped forward from the shadows in a suit that cost more than Marshall's car, rain soaking through the white of his collar shirt, tattoos climbing his neck like dark ivy, and he didn't look at Marshall like a threat. He looked at him like an inconvenience. Marshall's mouth opened, then closed. Who? Wrong question. Minute Sun said softly, his gaze finally, slowly, dropping to Marshall like something beneath consideration. The right question is, how far did you drive tonight, to make the worst decision of your life? Nadia didn't step back. She didn't flinch. She pressed her palm against Minute Sun's chest, felt the steady thunder of his heartbeat, and lifted her eyes to the man who had once made her afraid of her own shadow. She wasn't that woman anymore. Go home, Marshall, she said. Her voice didn't shake. Not even a little. Whatever you think you found, she doesn't exist anymore. The rain poured. Nobody moved. And somewhere behind Marshall, his engine was still running, because some part of him, the smart part, already knew he should have never come here at all. 3 years ago, Nadia ran with nothing but the clothes on her back and a secret she swore she'd take to her grave. She never planned to stop running. She never planned on him. And she never, not once, planned on becoming the most protected woman in the city. But Marshal Robb had just made one thing very clear. The past doesn't bury itself. Bell, before we begin, like this story, subscribe so you never miss a chapter, and comment below where you are watching from. I would love to say hello to you. The estate sat at the edge of the city like a secret the skyline was keeping. Nadia had learned to love it quietly, the way you love something you almost didn't survive long enough to find. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the east wing, her camel coat still on, watching the rain streak down the glass in thin silver lines. Behind her, the house breathed the way only old money did, slow, certain, unhurried. Marble floors that caught the light like frozen water. Ceilings so high they made you feel both small and somehow chosen. 3 years. She pressed her fingertips to the cold glass and let herself count them the way she used to count bruises. 1, 2, 3. Except these years hadn't left marks, they'd erased them. Slowly, imperfectly, the way scar tissue forms over something that should have killed you and doesn't. She had come to Minute Sun's estate with nothing. No last name she trusted. No forwarding address. Just the hollow-eyed determination of a woman who had decided that if she was going to disappear, she was going to do it completely. She hadn't planned to stay. She hadn't planned on the man who ran the estate asking her nothing. No questions, no history, no explanation, and simply placing a key on the kitchen counter and walking away. She hadn't planned on a lot of things Minute Sun did. She heard his footsteps before she heard him, unhurried, deliberate, the kind of walk that owned whatever floor it crossed. He came to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off his suit jacket, still slightly damp from the rain. He didn't say anything for a long moment. That was another thing she hadn't planned on. How comfortable silence could be when it wasn't filled with the threat of something worse coming. "You're still wearing your coat," he said finally. "I like my coat. It's 70 degrees in the house, Nadia." She smiled at the glass. Then maybe your thermostat is wrong. She heard the low sound he made, not quite a laugh, but the architecture of one, and felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. This was what 3 years of safety looked like. Coat arguments and warm houses and a man who looked at her like she was worth looking at. But even as she stood there, even as the warmth of the estate wrapped around her like something earned, she felt it again. That cold thing at the back of her neck. She told herself it was the rain. She told herself a lot of things. It started small. That was how it always started with Marshall. Small, so you doubted yourself. So you felt crazy before you felt afraid. The first thing was the photograph. It appeared on the kitchen counter on a Tuesday morning, a printed image, slightly overexposed, of Nadia standing outside a flower shop 3 blocks from the estate. She was laughing at something the vendor had said. She looked relaxed, unsuspecting. The timestamp in the corner read 6 days prior. She stared at it for a long time before she turned it face down. She didn't tell Minute Son. Not yet. The second thing was the voicemail. A burner number, untraceable. No words, just the sound of a song she hadn't heard in 4 years. A song Marshall used to play in the apartment on nights that started well and ended with her pressed against a wall trying to remember how to breathe. She deleted it and stood over the kitchen sink for 10 minutes before she trusted her hands to stop shaking. The third thing was worse. One of the security monitors, the one covering the East Garden gate, went dark for exactly 4 minutes on a Thursday night. When it came back online, there was a single red rose laid against the gate post, thorns and all. No card. No explanation. Just the message it was designed to send. I can get close. Anytime I want. And there is nothing you can do. Nadia picked up the rose, carried it to the back of the garden, and buried it in the soil beneath the magnolia tree with her bare hands. Then she went inside, washed the dirt from her fingers, and made tea like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Marshall Robb had found her. Found her life. Found the new walls she'd built and decided, as he always had, that what belonged to him was still his regardless of what the woman inside it believed. She sat at the kitchen table with her tea going cold and made a decision. She was not going to be afraid this time. She was going to be ready. Minute's son found out on a Friday. She hadn't told him. He'd found out the way he found out everything. Through the invisible network of eyes and ears that wrapped the estate like a second skin. One of his men had pulled the security footage, found the 4-minute gap, cross-referenced it with the external cameras on the neighboring building, and placed a still image of a man in a dark leather jacket on Minute's son's desk by noon. By the time Nadia walked into his office that evening, Minute's son was already standing at his desk, hands flat on the surface, looking at the photograph with the kind of stillness that, on a less measured man, would have been fury. On him, it was something colder. You knew, he said without looking up. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, and that almost made it worse. I was handling it. Nadia. I said I was handling. You buried a rose in the garden with your hands at 2 in the morning. He finally looked up. His eyes found hers across the room, and the tattoos climbing his neck seemed darker in the low light, more pronounced, like the house itself was reminding her of what he was. My people see everything. That's the point. She crossed her arms. Then your people also saw that I was fine. You weren't fine. You were performing fine. There's a difference. The accuracy of it landed somewhere tender, and she hated him a little for it. She moved to the window. Always the window, always needing something solid and transparent to face. I'm not going to sit upstairs while you handle my problem like I'm furniture you're storing. That's not what I'm. That's exactly what it becomes. She turned. I spent 4 years being managed by a man, Minute's son. I am not doing it again, even kindly. Even by you. The silence after that was a different kind, not comfortable. Charged. He straightened, adjusted the cuff of his jacket in that precise way he had, and for a moment she couldn't read him at all. Then he said, quietly, I'm not trying to manage you. I'm trying to keep you alive. Then teach me how to help do that. Don't lock me in a golden cage and call it love. The word landed between them like something fragile. Neither of them moved to pick it up. But Minute's son's jaw shifted, just slightly, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not anger. Not authority. Fear. For her. Fine, he said at last. But you do nothing alone. Agreed. She held his gaze for a long beat. Agreed. The infiltrator's name was Priya. She had been with the estate for 14 months. Background checked. Vetted. Quiet, efficient, and apparently very good at being invisible while moving through rooms she had no reason to be in. Nadia found out by accident. The best and worst way to find out anything. She'd come down to the kitchen at midnight for water, sleep restless and unable to quiet her mind, and she'd seen the light under the pantry door. She'd assumed it was one of the night staff. She almost didn't stop. But something, that neck-cold thing again, made her pause, and through the thin crack of the door she saw Priya crouched over the service entry panel, her phone pressed to her ear, speaking in a low, fast voice. She's been in the East Wing all week. He wants the schedule. I told you, I can only get you the Thursday rotation. Nadia stepped back. Her pulse was a controlled thunder in her ears. She didn't run for Minute's son. She thought about it. She almost did it. But instead she walked calmly back to the kitchen counter, picked up the heavy marble pestle sitting beside the herb rack, and when Priya stepped out of the pantry and turned around, she was standing right there. Priya's face went the color of old paper. Nadia. Sit down. Something in her voice, flat, quiet, immovable, made Priya sit. Minute's son arrived 4 minutes later with 2 of his men. He took one look at Priya, one look at Nadia standing in front of her with a marble pestle and the expression of a woman who'd already made her peace with whatever came next, and he stopped in the doorway. He said nothing for a moment. Then, you found her yourself. I told you I wasn't going to be furniture. His men took Priya. Minute's son crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and stood in front of Nadia and looked at her, really looked, the way he sometimes did when she did something that recalibrated something in him. You could have called me, he said. I handled it. And now, finally, she saw the corner of his mouth move. Yes, he said. You did. From Priya, by morning, they had a location. A warehouse on the south side of the city, registered to a shell company that unraveled itself like cheap thread under Minute's son's people's scrutiny. A staging ground. Supplies. 3 men already positioned. Marshall wasn't just watching anymore. He was building something. White right pointing backhand index if you're still reading. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, like this and subscribe. The story is about to get even more intense. Don't miss what comes next. Minute's son told her to pack light. She asked where they were going. He said somewhere safe. She asked what that meant. He said she'd understand when they got there. She packed light. They drove for 40 minutes through the kind of American city night that never fully went dark. Street lights and gas stations and the orange glow of 24-hour diners blurring past the tinted windows of the car. Minute's son sat beside her in the back seat, not speaking, watching the city with the patient eyes of a man who had long since made peace with how much of the world wanted to hurt him. When they stopped, she looked out the window and went very still. It was a brownstone. Narrow, old brick, tucked between 2 larger buildings in a neighborhood that had once been rough and was now slowly being reclaimed. Coffee shops moving in where pawn shops used to be, flower boxes appearing on window ledges. But this building hadn't changed. It still had the broken second step on the front stoop. It still had the faded blue paint on the door. She knew this door. Minute's son. I know. This is the building where you came in out of the rain 3 years ago and asked the man in the first-floor apartment if he knew where you could find work that didn't require a social security number. He paused. And the man happened to be me. She stared at the blue door. 3 years ago she had been 26 years old, rain-soaked, $200 in a Ziploc bag, and running from a man who had spent 4 years convincing her that she was nothing without him. She had knocked on a stranger's door because she had nowhere else to knock. She had expected to be turned away, or worse. Instead she had found this man, who had given her tea, who had asked her nothing, who had simply looked at her across a kitchen table with those dark, measured eyes and said you can stay until you figure out what's next. She had never left. You kept it, she said softly. I own the building. She looked at him. I bought it 6 months after you arrived, he said, and his voice was carefully neutral in the way it got when he was saying something that mattered more than he wanted to show. In case you ever needed somewhere to come back to. She didn't have words for what moved through her chest in that moment. It was too large and too quiet at the same time, like something that had been waiting 3 years to be let out. She pressed her palm against his jaw. He turned into it, barely, but she felt him do it. "We're going to finish this," she said. He covered her hand with his. The tattoos on his knuckles were cool from the night air. "Yes," he said. "We are." Inside the safe house, Minute Sun's team spread out their intelligence. Maps, photographs, movement patterns. The warehouse confirmed. 3 additional men Marshall had flown in from out of state. And a name, a federal contact Marshall had been cultivating, someone he believed he could hand information to in exchange for immunity and walking money. This was no longer a stalker with a grudge. This was a man building leverage. He's going to make a move. Minute Sun's head of security, a compact, sharp-eyed man named Ty, said over the table. "He'll contact you before he does. He'll want to feel powerful first." Minute Sun looked at Nadia across the table. She looked back. "Then let him call," she said. The call came on a Sunday. It came to Minute Sun's personal line, a number less than 12 people in the world possessed, and that alone told them everything they needed to know about how deep Marshall's infiltration had gone and how long he'd been planning this. Minute Sun put it on speaker. He and Nadia sat across from each other at the safe house table, Ty standing at the wall, 2 other men by the door. The room was very quiet. Marshall's voice filled it like something that had tracked mud across clean floors. "Son." He said the name like a joke he was enjoying. "Long time. I hear you've been keeping something of mine warm." Minute Sun said nothing. His face was a closed door. "I'm going to make this simple," Marshall continued, "because I'm a simple man. $3 million, wired to an account I'll send you. And Nadia. In a car. Alone. Tomorrow night." A pause. "In exchange, the federal contact I've been talking to for the past 8 months forgets everything I told him about your operation. Every name. Every location. Every shipment." Nadia's hands were flat on the table. She kept them flat. She kept her face even. "And if I decline," Minute Sun said, his first words, even, conversational, as if he were discussing a dinner reservation. "Then Monday morning, 3 agents show up at addresses you really don't want agents showing up at." Another pause, savored. "I've been patient, son. 3 years patient. But I think we both know Nadia was never really yours to keep." The line clicked off. The silence afterward was dense and particular. Nadia looked at Minute Sun. He was looking at the phone with the expression of a man running calculations too fast for the human eye to track. "He wants you to feel cornered," Ty said. "He wants me to feel like I have to choose between my organization and her," Minute Sun corrected quietly. He looked up. "Which means he doesn't understand what she is to this organization." "What does that mean?" Nadia asked. He held her gaze. "It means there is no choice. It means we go through him." She exhaled slowly. "The federal contact is already being addressed." A small pause. "I have people who are better at conversations than Marshall." She studied him for a long moment. This man who existed in the space between law and absence of it, who had built an empire in the dark and somehow managed to fill it with something that felt, against all reason, like light. "You should have led with that," she said. I wanted to hear his voice. Minute Sun stood, adjusting his cuffs in that precise way. "Now I know exactly how afraid he is." He didn't sound afraid. Men like Marshall always sound the least afraid when they are the most. He looked at her across the table. "He gave us a deadline because he needs one. He's not in control. He's performing it." Nadia held that. Then she said, "I want to be in the room when this ends." Minute Sun was quiet for a beat. "I know," he said. "That's why we're going to spend the next 3 days making sure you're ready." Ty didn't go easy on her. She hadn't asked him to. The first morning in the safe house's lower level, a wide, bare-floored room that smelled of clean concrete and effort, he handed her a training schedule and said, without preamble, "By Thursday, you will know 3 things: how to fall without getting hurt, how to create distance from a larger opponent, and how to use a room against someone." She said good morning to you too, and picked up the schedule. He drilled her through controlled falls until her hip bones ached and her palms were raw, and she could throw herself to the ground and be back on her feet before the motion finished its arc. He taught her pressure points, not the movie version, the real version, the quiet clinical brutality of targeting the body's soft architecture. He taught her to read a room for exits and obstacles in under 3 seconds. He was patient in the way that competent, serious people are patient, without condescension, without unnecessary praise, just correction and repetition until the correction became the body's first language. Minute's son watched one session from the doorway. Just one. He didn't interrupt. When Ty finally called time, Minute's son pushed off the doorframe and left without a word. But later, when Nadia came upstairs with tired hands and a bruise forming along her left forearm, she found a glass of water and 2 aspirin on the counter, and Minute's son sitting at the table reviewing documents like he hadn't moved all day. "You didn't have to watch," she said. "I wasn't watching." He turned a page. "I was nearby." She sat down across from him. The safe house kitchen was small and warm and smelled like whatever one of the men had made for lunch, something with garlic, something with heat. Outside the window, the city moved through its afternoon indifferent to all of them. "Tell me something," she said. He looked up. "When you first let me stay, 3 years ago, did you know? About Marshall? About what I was running from?" He held her gaze for a moment. "Not the details," he said. "But I could see what kind of running it was." "And you didn't ask?" "No. Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because the woman who knocked on my door that night didn't need questions. She needed somewhere to put down the weight she was carrying." A pause. "I figured the rest would come when you were ready." She looked at him, this careful, dangerous, improbable man, and felt something settle in her chest that had been restless for a very long time. "It's coming now," she said. "I know." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. That same gesture, the cool tattoos, the steady warmth underneath. "And you're ready?" She turned her hand over and held his. "Yeah," she said. "I am." The breach happened on a Wednesday night, 40 minutes before the scheduled confrontation. Marshall didn't wait for the meeting. That was his tell. His impatience had always been the thing that undid him, and it undid him here too. He sent 6 men through the estate's north perimeter, while the main gate held the attention of what he thought was Minute's son's full security presence. It wasn't. Minute's son had anticipated early movement. But not 6 men. He'd anticipated 4. The first alarm hit at 10:47, and the estate came alive like something that had been waiting. Nadia was in the second-floor corridor when the lights shifted to the low amber of emergency protocol, and she moved, not away, toward the sound of the first commotion, because 3 days of training had rewired something in her and because she was not going to wait in a room. She came down the main staircase to find the marble entry hall in controlled chaos, 2 of Minute's son's guards engaging men near the east corridor, the sound of running feet on the floor above, a crash from the direction of the library. She pressed against the wall, kept low, scanned the room the way Ty had taught her, exits, obstacles, sight lines, 3 seconds, and moved. Minute's son materialized from the library doorway like he'd been poured out of the shadows, his jacket gone, his shirt rolled at the sleeves, and he was not the composed man of dinner tables and quiet offices. He was something older and harder and completely in his element. "East corridor, move," he said, catching her arm without breaking stride, and she moved. They fought through the corridor together. Nadia wasn't throwing any of Marshall's men single-handed. She was clear-eyed about that, but she was useful. She created distance where Minute's son needed it. She used a doorframe the way Ty had shown her. She put a man's knee sideways with a strike that had taken her 40 repetitions to get right, and when he went down she didn't stop moving. The fight lasted 11 minutes. It felt like 11 hours. When it was done, the marble floor had scuff marks and 1 cracked console table and 3 of Marshall's men in zip ties and 2 more who'd found the better judgment to run. Minute's son stood in the center of the hall with his forearm bleeding from a cut she hadn't seen him take, looking at the room with the steady expression of a man tallying damage. Ty appeared from the north corridor. "Perimeter clear. 2 ran west. We have vehicles on them." He glanced at Nadia. "You good?" She was breathing hard. Her left shoulder ached from where she'd hit a wall. She had a split at her lower lip she didn't remember getting. "I'm good," she said. Ty nodded. Once, with something in his expression that wasn't quite approval but was adjacent to it. Minute's son crossed to her. He took her face in both hands, careful, thorough, checking the cut at her lip, her eyes, the line of her jaw. "I'm fine," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm checking anyway." She let him. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Something shifted in his face, that cold, precise shift she'd seen once before. The one that meant the calculation was finished. "Marshall," he said. "He's outside. Alone." Nadia looked at him. "That's mine," she said. The rain had come back. It always came back. Nadia stepped out the front door of the estate alone, into the dark and the wet, and walked down the long driveway toward the gate where Marshall stood, hands in his leather jacket pockets, rain-soaked and smaller somehow than she remembered. Not in height. In everything else. She stopped 10 feet from him. He looked at her for a long moment, looked at the way she carried herself, the straight spine, the calm in her face, and something flickered behind his eyes that she recognized. Disorientation. He'd come here expecting someone he knew. "Where's son?" he said. "Inside. I want to talk to him." "You're talking to me." His jaw shifted. Old habit, the prelude to escalation. She had flinched at that shift 10,000 times in 4 years. She watched it now with the detached clarity of someone who had learned the architecture of a threat so thoroughly that the threat itself no longer had power over her nervous system. "Nadia." He moved a step forward. "Don't do this. Don't play his games." "I'm not playing anyone's games," she said. "I'm telling you that this ends tonight, and I'm telling you that I'm the one ending it. Not Minute's son. Me. You think you're protected because of him. I'm not protected because of him." Her voice was flat and even, and she felt it in her chest as she said it. The truth of it, finally, completely. "I'm protected because of me. 3 years of building a life. 3 years of becoming someone you don't recognize because she's not afraid of you anymore." She took 1 step closer. "The woman you used to manage doesn't exist. And no amount of photographs or voicemails or roses at the gate is going to bring her back, because I buried her. Deliberately. And I am standing over her grave right now telling you that you can leave this city tonight, or you can find out what the man inside does with people who threaten what belongs to him. Your choice. But make it fast. I'm wet and I'm tired and I have somewhere better to be." The rain came down. Marshall stared at her. And she watched it happen. The thing she had spent 4 years waiting for without knowing she was waiting for it. The collapse. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just the slow, visible deflation of a man who has spent years using fear as currency and has just been handed something fear can't buy. He didn't say anything. After a long moment, he took a step back. Then another. He was still looking at her when Minute's son's cars appeared on both ends of the street, quiet, unhurried, blocking both directions without urgency because they didn't need urgency. They had already won. The question had only ever been what form the winning would take. Marshall looked at the cars. Looked at Nadia. Looked at the gate. Then he turned and walked to the car that opened its door for him, Minute's son's men, efficient and silent, and he got in. Nadia stood in the rain until the car was gone. Then she turned around. Minute's son was standing in the open doorway of the estate, leaning against the frame, his arms crossed, his white shirt transparent with rain in the places where he'd walked out to the edge of the step without an umbrella. The tattoos. The slick-back hair. The expression on his face that she couldn't fully name except to say it was the most unguarded she had ever seen him. She walked back up the driveway. When she reached the step, she stopped in front of him. "Well," she said. He looked at her for a moment. This woman who had come to his door 3 years ago with nothing and had just walked out into the rain and faced the thing that had hunted her without flinching. "Well," he said, and his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. She stepped into the warmth of the house. He closed the door behind them. A week later, on a Thursday evening that was clear and cold and full of autumn light, Minute's son threw a dinner. Not a small one. The estate's main hall was set for 40 people, all of them part of the network. All of them significant, all of them people who had understood for years that Minute's son was a man who told you everything you needed to know through what he chose not to say. He had never introduced a woman at his table. He had never shared his household with anyone. His personal life was a locked room, and everyone in that hall had accepted, long ago, that the room would stay locked. Nadia wore a dress the color of deep wine and her hair down, and she sat at his right. Not across from him. Not at the other end of the long table. At his right. There was a specific language in that. Everyone in the room spoke it, and she felt them all understand it the moment she sat down. The quiet recalibration, moving around the table like a current. Not hostility. Not surprise, exactly. Something more like the collective intake of breath before an acknowledgement. Minute's son stood when the room had settled. He didn't have the quality of a man who needed ceremony. He'd always had the kind of authority that filled a room without raising a voice. And so when he simply turned to Nadia with his glass raised, the room went silent. 3 years ago, he said, I told this woman she could stay until she figured out what was next. A pause. She figured it out. He looked at her with those dark, measured eyes and something that was not the controlled man she'd spent 3 years learning to read. Something warmer, more certain, settled in a place deeper than control. This house has a head now, he said. And it's her. The room raised their glasses. Nadia held his gaze across the small distance between them and thought about the woman who had knocked on a stranger's door in the rain with $200 and nowhere to go. She thought about 4 years of being made small and 3 years of being allowed to grow back, and the specific, hard-won knowledge that survival wasn't the destination. It was the beginning. She raised her glass. Took you long enough, she said quietly, for him only. And Minute's son, careful, dangerous, improbable Minute's son, smiled. Not the corner of the mouth ghost of one. A real one. Full and unguarded and entirely hers. And somewhere on the south side of the city, Marshal Robb was being loaded onto a private flight with a one-way ticket and a very clear understanding, delivered personally by Ty in the language that men like Marshall only fully comprehended when someone was looking them directly in the eyes with nothing to lose, that he was never to return. Not to this city. Not to this state. Not within 100 miles of the woman who had once been afraid of him and was now, by every measure that mattered, untouchable. The dinner went long into the night. The estate was warm and full of voices and the kind of light that only exists when something has finally been set right. Nadia sat at the head of the family. And for the first time in longer than she could calculate, longer than 3 years, maybe longer than her whole adult life, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not surviving. Living. And just like that, Nadia was no longer someone's victim. She was someone's world. 3 years of running. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of rebuilding herself from the inside out. And in the end, it wasn't just that she survived Marshal Robb. She outgrew him. She outgrew the fear, outgrew the woman he tried to reduce her to, and stepped into a life he never had the power to imagine for her, because men like Marshall can only ever see you as small as they need you to be. And Minute's son. Minute's son saw her exactly as she was, and chose her anyway. Every single day. Quietly. Completely. Without condition. That's not a rescue, beloved. That's a recognition. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in Nadia even a little bit, in the running, in the rebuilding, in the moment she stood in that rain and didn't flinch, then this one was for you. You already know what to do. Thumbs up sign, smash that like button. It tells me you want more stories like this, and I pour everything into making them for you. Bell, hit subscribe and turn on your notifications, because the next story is already coming, and trust me, you do not want to miss where we're going next. Speech balloon and drop a comment right now. Tell me where you're watching from. Seriously. Whether you're in New York, Nairobi, Toronto, Manila, London, Port Harcourt, or somewhere I haven't heard of yet, I want to see your city in the comments. I read every single one. Every single one. And I will say hello back. Now tell me something before you go. Who was your favorite character in this story? Was it Nadia standing in the rain, fearless and finally free? Was it Minute's son, quietly buying a building just so she'd always have somewhere safe to come back to? Or was it that moment Marshall got in that car and knew it was over? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Final beat. Music swells softly. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for choosing this story out of everything the internet had to offer you today. I don't take that lightly. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe. Stay powerful. And remember, The right person doesn't make you smaller to love you. They give you room to become everything you already were.